Queens of Atlanta by Vennie Hainsworth. Part 1. Atlanta didn't crown queens overnight. It whispered their names first. Before the city ever learned to say them together, they were just 4 homegirls moving through the heat and neon of the A, laughing loud, dressing louder, and believing destiny had a zip code. They weren't chasing power yet. They were chasing more. Ivory was the center of gravity. Chocolate-skinned, sharp-eyed, with a calm that made people listen even when she barely spoke. She didn't rush words or waste movement. Ivory observed everything, remembered everything. People mistook her quiet for softness, assumed silence meant weakness. That mistake would cost them later. Naz was her opposite. Light-skinned, long hair always laid, confidence entering the room before she did. Naz loved luxury the way some people loved oxygen. Name brands weren't about showing off. They were proof she was meant for better than what she came from. Her charm disarmed people before they realized they were being studied. Nene brought the spice. Riken, expressive, quick with her mouth and quicker with her mind. She could read a room in seconds, turn strangers into allies, vibes into opportunities. Atlanta loved her energy. And energy, when directed right, turns into influence. Then there was Jasmine. Tall, light-skinned, model pretty with a walk that made heads turn and silence feel loud. Jasmine didn't chase attention. It followed her. She wore designer like it was custom-fitted to her future. People saw beauty and stopped there. They never noticed how much she calculated before she moved. Together, they were known for one thing: style. Each queen wore it differently. Ivory kept it clean and intentional. Naz went bold and expensive. Nene mixed street edge with high fashion. Jasmine looked like a runway that learned how to hustle. When they stepped out, people whispered, "Who are they?" They called themselves the Queens of Atlanta as a joke at first. A laugh over drinks, a hashtag, a dream spoken half serious, half playful. None of them knew yet how real that name would become. At this point, Atlanta was still bigger than them. The city watched as they moved through rooftop parties, private sections, fashion pop-ups, and quiet conversations that sounded harmless until they weren't. Each woman carried something the others didn't. Each filled a gap. Each trusted the circle. And that trust? That was the spark. This is before the rise, before the fall, before Atlanta had no choice but to bow. This is how the queens stepped onto the board. Queens of Atlanta by Vennie Hainsworth. Part 2. The Opportunity. Opportunities don't always knock. Sometimes they sit down beside you and order a drink. It started subtle. A private section that didn't require a reservation. A tab that never closed. A man who listened a little too closely when Ivory spoke. Atlanta had a way of testing people, sliding chances across the table to see who recognized their value. Ivory noticed first. She always did. The man wasn't flashy. No loud jewelry, no forced laughs, just influence wrapped in patience. He spoke about distribution, about moving smart, about people in the city who needed reliable women more than reckless men. Ivory didn't interrupt. She let him talk, let him reveal himself. Naz saw the numbers before anyone said them out loud. She'd been around money her whole life, close enough to want it, far enough to respect it. When the man mentioned percentages, her mind did the math instantly. This wasn't fast cash. This was structure, longevity, the kind of money that changes wardrobes, addresses, and last names. Nene felt the shift in the room. Energy don't lie. She saw how security suddenly paid attention, how certain doors opened without being touched. She recognized power when it entered, especially the quiet kind. Nene smiled, joked, kept things light, but her instincts were already clocking who was watching and who was waiting. Jasmine saw something else entirely: risk. She watched faces, the pauses between words, the way opportunity always came with a shadow attached. She knew beauty opened doors, but brains kept you alive once you walked through them. This wasn't a fantasy. This was a fork in the road. The man didn't make promises. He made suggestions. There was a gap in the city, he said, a space no one had filled correctly. Too much ego. Too many mistakes. He needed people who moved clean, looked untouchable, and blended into rooms money already respected. He needed queens, not pawns. The girls didn't answer that night. They finished their drinks, laughed like nothing had changed, took pictures, walked out into the Atlanta night like four women with nothing heavier on their shoulders than designer bags. But once they were alone, silence. Ivory broke it first. "This ain't random." Naz nodded. "And it ain't small." Nenny smirked, but her eyes were sharp. City don't offer you a seat unless it wants something. Jasmine looked ahead, already seeing the future stretch open and dangerous. "If we do this," she said quietly, "everything changes." Nobody disagreed, because deep down all four of them felt it. The opportunity wasn't just money. It was access. It was power. It was the beginning of something Atlanta wouldn't be able to ignore. And once you see the board clearly, you don't go back to being a piece. Queens of Atlanta, by Vennie Hainsworth. Part 3, The First Move. The first move is never loud. It's quiet, calculated, invisible to anyone not paying attention. They met in Ivory's apartment, lights low, City humming outside the windows like it already knew what was coming. No glam, no designer, just four women and a decision that couldn't be undone. Ivory laid it out plain. No hype, no fear, just facts. The opportunity came with structure, but structure only worked if they controlled their lane. Nobody freelanced, nobody panicked, nobody talked too much. Naz handled the numbers. She always did. Startup costs? Clean money mixed with quiet money. Investments that didn't look like investments. She made it make sense, then made it profitable before anything even touched the street. Nene moved the people. She didn't recruit, she positioned. Drivers who didn't ask questions. Vendors who valued discretion over ego. Faces that blended into Atlanta traffic like they belonged there, because they did. Jasmine secured the cover. Pop-ups, fashion events, brand launches, places where money moved fast and nobody blinked at excess. She made sure their presence looked natural, expected, untouchable. Beauty with purpose, glamour as armor. The first move wasn't about expansion. It was about testing the city. One route, one product, 1 week, no mistakes allowed. Atlanta responded. Money came back clean, fast, predictable, no drama, no ripples, just confirmation. Ivory watched it all without smiling, because success wasn't the dangerous part. Comfort was. They didn't celebrate, they didn't post, they didn't talk about it outside the room. The second night they met again, quieter than before. "That was easy," Nas said. Ivory finally looked up. "That's how you know it's real." Nenny leaned back, eyes sharp. "City always lets you win once." Jasmine nodded slowly. She felt it. The shift. The air around them was different now, heavier. Watching. They had made their first move. And somewhere in Atlanta, people noticed pieces changing places on the board. Not enough to stop it. Just enough to get nervous. The queens didn't rush. They never did. Because once you move the first piece, the game has already started. Queens of Atlanta, by Vennie Hainsworth. Part 4, Things Coming Together. Nothing big ever clicks all at once. It layers. By now, the queens moved like they'd been doing this for years. Schedules synced without discussion. Moves got made without explanation. Everybody knew their lane and respected it. Ivory stayed at the center, not because she demanded it, but because everything made sense when it passed through her. She saw patterns before they formed, problems before they spoke. When something felt off, she paused the whole machine until it felt right again. Naz tightened the flow. Money in, money out, nothing sloppy. Shells inside shells. Businesses that smiled on the surface and stayed silent underneath. She turned profit into protection, wealth into leverage. Nobody traced anything back because there was nothing obvious to follow. Nene became the bridge. If someone wanted access, they went through her. If someone brought drama, they never made it past her. She filtered personalities, checked loyalty, and handled egos before they ever touched the circle. Atlanta talked, but only what Nene allowed them to talk about. Jasmine polished the image until it felt untouchable. Invites started coming without requests. Fashion houses, private events, rooms where decisions were made quietly. She made sure the queens always looked like they belonged, because by now they did. Glamour stopped being decoration. It became strategy. The city adjusted. Certain faces disappeared. Certain doors opened faster. Certain opportunities landed directly in their laps without explanation. Nobody said the queen's name out loud yet, but everyone felt the shift. Then came the test. A delay. A small one. Just enough to see who panicked. Nobody did. Ivory rerouted. Naz recalculated. Nene replaced a weak link. Jasmine smoothed the optics. Problem solved in silence. That's when Ivory knew. They weren't building something anymore. They had built it. Atlanta wasn't resisting them. It was reorganizing around them. And the most dangerous part? They still looked like four women just enjoying life. But underneath, everything was finally coming together. Queens of Atlanta, by Venny Hainsworth. Part 5, Loyalty. Loyalty doesn't crack loud, it leaks. The problem didn't come from the outside. That would have been easy. Outsiders were predictable, desperate, loud when they felt pressure. This came from someone inside the room. Not one of the queens, but close enough to hear the silence between them. It started small. A number that didn't line up. A delay that had no real explanation. Ivory felt it before she saw it. A shift in rhythm. The operation still moved, but the heartbeat was off. Naz caught it next. She never missed money. Not missing. Misplaced. Just enough to question, not enough to accuse. Someone testing how closely the numbers were being watched. Nene watched people instead of paperwork. She noticed who talked more than usual, who asked questions sideways instead of straight, who suddenly needed reassurance they'd never asked for before. Jasmine watched behavior. Eye contact. Body language. Who looked relieved when meetings ended. The name came up once, casually, too casually. A trusted link, been around since early days, useful, reliable, comfortable. Comfort was always the tell. They didn't confront him. Ivory never rushed exposure. Instead, she created space. A fake problem, a controlled setback, just enough pressure to see which way loyalty leaned when the room got quiet. The response came fast. Too fast. Information moved that shouldn't have. A conversation echoed back to them from somewhere it never should have reached. Not sold, tested. Like someone dipping a toe in betrayal to see how warm the water was. That was enough. Naz locked the money down. Every route rerouted. Every access point shrank. What he could touch yesterday disappeared overnight. Nene pulled him closer socially, smiling wider, listening more, letting him believe he was still trusted. People reveal everything when they think they're safe. Jasmine adjusted the image. The queens appeared unbothered, untouched, stronger than ever. No cracks, no panic. Ivory waited. Then she ended it clean. No drama, no accusations, just removal. By the time he realized something was wrong, he was already outside the circle. Doors closed, phones silent, access gone. Not punished, not chased. Erased. That was the lesson. The queens didn't destroy disloyalty. They outgrew it. And Atlanta learned something important that week. You don't test loyalty where power lives quietly. Because the queens of Atlanta were no longer building trust. They were enforcing it. Queens of Atlanta, by Venny Hainsworth. Part 6, Footprints. Power leaves marks. Not obvious ones. Not at first. But in a city like Atlanta, patterns don't go unnoticed for long. It started with whispers, not names, questions. Why certain routes stayed smooth while others collapsed. Why money moved clean through spaces that used to be chaotic. Why a few women kept showing up everywhere that mattered, untouched by the mess around them. Ivory heard it through silence. Meetings that ended quicker. People choosing words more carefully around her. Influence adjusting its tone. Naz saw it in the numbers. Margins tightening where they shouldn't. Costs creeping up without explanation. Someone somewhere had started watching the flow. Nene felt it in the streets. Faces she didn't recognize asking familiar questions. Too polite. Too curious. People listening more than talking. Jasmine saw it in the rooms. Invitations with extra eyes. Compliments followed by pauses. Attention that lingered a second too long. The kind that wasn't admiration. It was assessment. The queens hadn't been loud. That was the problem. Quiet success scares people. Then came the pressure. A shipment delayed. Not lost, not seized. Just paused. A reminder that someone else could reach out and touch their operation if they wanted to. Ivory didn't react. She gathered the queens and said one thing. We don't disappear, we redefine. They shifted strategy overnight. Naz moved money sideways, not forward. Less growth, more camouflage. Profit stayed steady, visibility dropped. Nene changed the faces. New intermediaries, fresh voices. Anyone watching saw movement, but couldn't follow it. Jasmine elevated the image. Bigger events, cleaner fronts, places where scrutiny looked like praise, where presence raised no suspicion. Ivory stayed still, because stillness makes observers uncomfortable. Whoever was watching wanted reaction, fear, mistakes. They got none. Instead, the queen's footprints didn't vanish. They multiplied. Too many to track, too many to trace, everywhere and nowhere at once. Atlanta noticed. Not enough to move openly, but enough to start planning. And when outside pressure starts planning, that's when you know you've arrived. Queens of Atlanta, by Vennie Hainsworth. Part 7, The Invitation. The message didn't come direct. It never does when power is involved. It came wrapped as a compliment. A mutual connection praising their discretion a little too much. A casual mention of someone who respected how they moved. No demands, no threats. Just interest. Ivory knew immediately. This wasn't curiosity. This was recognition. The man didn't need an introduction. His name never floated in rumors because he didn't live there. He existed above the noise. Old Atlanta money mixed with new influence. Politics, real estate, logistics, favors. The kind of figure people adjusted around without realizing they were doing it. He likes how we move, Nini said, half smiling. Nas didn't smile back. People like that don't like. They evaluate. Jasmine felt the weight settle in her chest. A meeting like this didn't mean danger, but it meant elevation. And elevation always came with exposure. The invite was specific. Private. Neutral territory. No entourage, no phones, no second chances. They went together. Not dressed to intimidate, not dressed to impress. Just clean, controlled, confident. The man studied them the way architects study land. I've been watching, he said calmly. You didn't disrupt the city, you reorganized it. Ivory met his eyes without flinching. That's harder than taking over, he continued, and rarer. He spoke about respect, about sustainability, about how Atlanta chewed people up who moved sloppy or loud. He said their name once. Queens, not as a joke, as a title. I don't want in, he said. I want alignment. That was the test. Naz clocked the leverage behind the words. Nene read the room and felt no threat, just boundaries. Jasmine watched his hands steady and open. No rush, no hunger. Ivory answered slow. Alignment goes both ways. He smiled. That's why I asked for a meeting. When they left, the city felt different. Heavier. Like Atlanta had acknowledged them officially. They hadn't gained an enemy. They hadn't gained a partner. They'd gained something more dangerous. Visibility at the highest level. And once power knows your face, you don't get to be anonymous again. Queens of Atlanta. Part 8, The Bigger Picture. The realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in. A favor here that solved a problem they hadn't spoken out loud. A delay that fixed itself before Nas even rerouted the money. A door opening in a room they'd never knocked on. None of it was free. Ivory felt the shift first. The city had stopped pushing back. It was guiding them. Like invisible hands nudging pieces into place. We're not just moving through Atlanta anymore, she said quietly one night. Atlanta is moving us. Nas studied the books. Everything was smoother than it should have been. Growth without resistance, protection without requests. That scared her more than pressure ever had. This ain't organic, she said. Somebody's clearing the path. Nene connected the dots socially. Certain names suddenly spoke their name with familiarity. People with no reason to help them were suddenly helpful. The same powerful figure's influence echoed everywhere without being mentioned. They're lining us up, Nana said, like a showcase. Jasmine felt it deepest. Every event she attended now came with expectations. People watched how she spoke, how she moved, who she stood next to. Not admiration, assessment. She realized they weren't being invited anymore. They were being introduced. The queens met in silence, the weight of it settling between them. They weren't being courted to stay small. They were being positioned to represent something bigger than themselves. A new order. A cleaner system. A face the city could point to and say, this works. That kind of spotlight burns, Nas said. Ivory nodded. Or it crowns. The truth was unavoidable now. Staying invisible was no longer an option. Neither was staying exactly where they were. Whatever was coming next would demand more control, more unity, and harder choices. Because when powerful people start placing you instead of chasing you, you're no longer playing the game. You're becoming part of the structure. Queens of Atlanta. Part 9, The Choice. The room felt heavier than usual. No music. No distractions. Just truth sitting in the middle like it belonged there. They all knew what the meeting was about before anyone spoke. Accepting the role didn't mean signing papers or shaking hands. It meant agreement, silence, moving forward instead of sideways. Naz spoke first. She usually did when money was involved, but this wasn't just about money. Once we accept it, she said, we don't get to pretend anymore. We become the example, the face. That comes with expectations we don't control. Nene crossed her arms. We already don't control them. People are watching whether we like it or not. At least this way, we decide how the story goes. Jasmine stayed quiet, eyes distant. She'd been feeling the weight personally. Longer looks, deeper scrutiny, less room to just exist. Being positioned meant being visible everywhere, all the time. Visibility costs, she said finally. Peace, privacy, mistakes. One slip and it won't just be us, it'll be all of us. Ivory listened. She always did. This role, Ivory said slowly, ain't about power. It's about responsibility. If we step into it, we don't just protect ourselves. We stabilize everything connected to us. Silence again. Because that was the truth. Accepting meant protecting people they didn't even know yet. Managing fallout they didn't create. Carrying weight that never clocked out. Rejecting it didn't mean freedom either. It meant becoming a problem to be solved. Naz exhaled. If we don't accept, somebody else will. Nene nodded, and they won't move like us. Jasmine looked at Ivory. If we do this, we do it our way. No rushing, no shortcuts, no selling ourselves out to look powerful. Ivory met each of their eyes. This only works if we stay queens, she said. Equal, united, nobody above the circle. That was the deciding line. They didn't vote. They didn't rush. But when Ivory stood, the others followed without thinking. The choice wasn't loud. It never is. But in that moment, the Queens of Atlanta accepted something bigger than ambition. They accepted responsibility, and once you accept that, there's no going back to just surviving. Queens of Atlanta. Part 10, No Going Back. There was a moment, small, quiet, when the door closed behind them. No sound, no signal. Just finality. The shift came the next morning. Phones rang differently, not more often, cleaner, fewer questions, clearer expectations, the kind of communication reserved for people who were no longer optional. Ivory felt it in the way conversations shortened around her. Decisions waited for her presence now. Silence followed her words like punctuation. Naz saw it when the numbers locked into place without resistance. No sudden freezes, no unexplained holds. Systems adjusted as if they'd been waiting for permission. Nene noticed how quickly situations dissolved before becoming problems. Conflicts vanished. Obstacles rerouted themselves. Influence moved ahead of her, clearing space. Jasmine felt it most in public. Rooms paused when she entered. Eyes tracked her not with curiosity but recognition. She wasn't being admired anymore. She was being measured. The powerful figure didn't call. He didn't need to. Instead, the test arrived. A situation too big to ignore, too public to avoid, too connected to pretend it wasn't theirs to handle. The kind of problem that separates people who play roles from people who hold them. Ivory made the call. Not loud, not dramatic, just decisive. And Atlanta responded. Things moved, people complied, outcomes aligned. What should have been chaos folded into order within hours. That was the moment it clicked for all of them. They weren't being positioned anymore. They were already placed. Naz leaned back later that night, quiet. Even if we wanted out now, there's nothing to step back into. Nene nodded slowly. We crossed the line people don't come back from. Jasmine stared out at the city lights. Every move from here on out echoes. Ivory didn't argue. There's no going back, she said simply. Only forward and only together. Atlanta didn't announce it. The city never does. But somewhere between decisions made in silence and power exercised without permission, the Queens of Atlanta stopped becoming a story. And started becoming structure. Queens of Atlanta. Part 11, The Cost. Power always collects. It doesn't rush you. It waits until you're settled, then asks for something you can't replace. It was Jasmine. It made sense that it would be. The opportunity came dressed as an elevation, a national fashion partnership, big money, bigger visibility, the kind of move that would cement the Queen's image far beyond Atlanta. But the terms were quiet. Too quiet. Ivory heard it in what wasn't said. Naz saw it in the fine print, exclusivity that felt like isolation. Nene felt it socially, who Jasmine would have to distance herself from to stay clean. Jasmine already knew. Accepting meant travel, constant presence, controlled appearances, no unscripted moments, no room for personal ties that didn't fit the image being built around the Queens. And one tie mattered most. Family. A responsibility she'd been carrying long before the crown ever hovered near her head. Someone who needed her close, present, grounded. Power didn't threaten. It offered. If you're serious, the message implied, this is the next step. Jasmine sat with it alone that night. City lights reflecting off the glass like a future she'd once prayed for. Everything she'd worked for was right there. But it wanted all of her. When she spoke the next day, her voice didn't shake. I can't take it, she said. Silence. Naz frowned. This would lock us in. Nene looked conflicted. It changes how they see us. Ivory studied Jasmine carefully. Not disappointed, not surprised. What's the cost? Ivory asked. Jasmine swallowed. I lose myself. And somebody I love pays for a power they didn't ask for. That was enough. Ivory nodded. Then we don't do it. But Naz started. Ivory cut her off gently. Power that demands sacrifice without consent isn't power we hold. It's power that owns us. The offer disappeared by the next morning. No explanation, no pushback. Just confirmation. Atlanta noticed. The Queens had turned something down that nobody else would have. That refusal echoed louder than acceptance ever could. Jasmine felt the weight lift, and the reality settle. Power didn't just test loyalty to the circle. It tested loyalty to self. And that night, the Queens understood something deeper than influence. They weren't just protecting their throne. They were protecting their humanity. Queens of Atlanta. Part 12, Blood and Power. The truth didn't arrive like a shock. It settled. Ivory sat alone when she finally put it together. Pieces she'd ignored for years lining up too clean to be coincidence. Doors that opened when she was too young to understand why. Protection that showed up without being requested. Problems that dissolved before they touched her life. The powerful figure wasn't new. He was familiar. Her godfather? The man who held her as a baby, who disappeared just enough to never raise questions, who sent gifts through other hands, who never interfered, but never stopped watching. He hadn't been circling the Queens. He'd been circling her. When Ivory told them, the room went still. Naz exhaled slowly. That explains everything. Nene shook her head, half in disbelief. So this whole time? He wasn't positioning us, Jasmine said quietly. He was waiting for you. Ivory didn't deny it. He told my mother once, Ivory said, voice steady, that the city would try to shape me before I ever chose who I was. He said if I survived long enough on my own, he'd know when I was ready. Ready for what was the question nobody asked. Because the answer sat heavy between them. Leadership. Succession. Legacy. This wasn't about approval. It was about inheritance. Ivory wasn't being tested to see if she could follow power. She was being watched to see if she could hold it without losing herself. He never stepped in, Ivory continued, because if he did, it wouldn't be mine. Silence again, but different now. Respect lived in it. Jasmine reached for Ivory's hand. So what happens now? Ivory stood. Now, she said, I stop pretending I don't know who I am. The Queens felt it, the shift inside her. Calm, rooted, undeniable. Not ambition. Readiness. Atlanta hadn't been grooming a figurehead. It had been waiting on a queen who didn't need permission. And Ivory? She was done growing into the role. She was ready to step fully into it. Queens of Atlanta. Part 13, The Confrontation. The meeting didn't happen in the shadows. It happened in the open, high above the city, glass walls, daylight pouring in like truth had nowhere to hide. Ivory walked in alone. Not because she had to, because this part was hers. He stood when she entered. Older now, sharper in a quieter way. The same calm presence she remembered from childhood, even if the memories came in pieces. His hand steady on her back, his voice low, always certain. You figured it out, he said. Ivory didn't sit right away. You let me. A small smile. Not proud, not defensive, honest. I needed to know you'd see it on your own. She finally sat, eyes locked on his. You watched my whole life. You shaped the space around me. You let me struggle. He nodded. I let you choose. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. It's harder. Silence stretched. The city moved below them, unaware. You could have stepped in any time, Ivory said. Stopped danger, made things easier. And then you would have belonged to me, he replied. Instead of yourself. That landed. I didn't build you, he continued. I protected the possibility of you. There's a difference. Ivory leaned forward. So why now? He didn't hesitate. Because you stopped surviving. You started stabilizing others. That's the line. Most never cross it. And the queens? Your reflection, he said simply. You chose equals. That told me everything. Ivory's jaw tightened. This wasn't fair. No, he said, but it was necessary. Another pause, softer this time. What do you want from me? Ivory asked. He shook his head. Nothing. She frowned. I don't need a puppet, he said. I need continuity. Someone who understands the city without being owned by it. Someone who can carry weight and still sleep at night. He met her gaze. That's you. Ivory exhaled slowly. And if I say no? Then I step back, he said, the same way I always have. She studied him, searching for manipulation, hunger, control. She found none. Only patience. Ivory stood. I'm not stepping into anyone's shadow. He smiled, this time with something close to pride. Good. Then step into your own. When she walked out, Atlanta looked different. Not bigger. Clearer. Ivory wasn't confronting power anymore. She was meeting it as an equal. Queens of Atlanta. Part 14, The Truth. Ivory didn't call a meeting. She called them. One by one, same place, same time, no delays. When the door closed, there was no small talk. No easing into it. The air already knew something had shifted. I met with him, Ivory said. Naz straightened. Nini's eyes sharpened. Jasmine went still. My godfather, Ivory continued. The powerful figure. He's been watching me my whole life. Silence didn't come from shock. It came from understanding. Naz broke it first. That explains the protection. Nene nodded slowly. The timing. The way things just moved. Jasmine's voice was quiet. So this was always about you? Ivory didn't flinch. It was always about choice. She told them everything. The waiting, the tests, the reason he never stepped in, the offer that wasn't an offer. He doesn't want control, Ivory said. He wants continuity. And he'll step back if I say no. Nene scoffed lightly. That's still power. Yes, Ivory agreed, but it's not ownership. Naz leaned forward. Where does that leave us? Ivory didn't answer immediately. It would have been easy to claim leadership outright. To let lineage speak for itself. To let power crown her in the room. She didn't. It leaves us exactly where we've always been, Ivory said. Equal. This only works if you choose it too. Jasmine searched her face. And if we don't? Then I walk away from it, Ivory said without hesitation. That landed heavier than any reveal. Naz exhaled. You'd give it all up? For us? Ivory said. Yes. Nene shook her head slowly, a smile creeping in. That's why it's you. Jasmine stood and stepped closer. You didn't hide this. You didn't decide for us. Ivory met her eyes. Never. The circle closed in tighter than before. Whatever was coming next wouldn't be inherited. It would be chosen. And for the first time since the city started watching them, the queens knew something solid. Power didn't divide them. It clarified them. Queens of Atlanta. Part 15, Ghosts Don't Stay Buried. The past never knocks. It crashes. The first sign wasn't chaos, it was interruption. A meeting canceled without explanation. A route that went dark mid-movement. Phones ringing once, then going silent. Ivory felt it in her chest before anyone spoke. This is him, she said. Not coming for me, coming through him. Her godfather's past didn't resurface as rumor. It resurfaced as action. Old names, old grudges, people who'd been pushed aside, outgrown, or quietly neutralized years ago. Men who'd watched power pass them by and decided the debt was finally due. Atlanta shifted overnight. Pressure hit from angles that didn't make sense, because they weren't meant to. This wasn't business. It was revenge wearing strategy. Naz locked things down fast. This isn't about money. They're burning paths just to see what lights up. Nene's sources confirmed it. They're sending a message. They want him to respond. Jasmine's voice tightened. And you're the response. Ivory didn't deny it. Her godfather finally called. Not to warn her. To apologize. I hoped it would stay buried, he said. But once you stepped forward, they remembered who I was. Ivory's jaw set. You don't get to protect me by disappearing now. A pause, heavy, honest. I won't, he said. But this is ugly. That night something exploded, literally. Not close enough to be random. Not far enough to be coincidence. A warning shot from ghosts who wanted blood, not balance. The queens regrouped fast. Nene handled the noise, kept panic from spreading, made sure the city didn't sense weakness. Naz rerouted everything. Emergency protocols, old-school methods, nothing traceable, nothing predictable. Jasmine controlled the image. Public calm, private strength, no cracks, no fear. Ivory stood in the middle of it all. This ends, she said. Not with retaliation, but with resolution. Because this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about inheritance. The ghosts wanted the old king to come out swinging. But they hadn't planned for a queen who knew how to end cycles instead of repeating them. Atlanta was about to learn something the hard way. The past may start the violence, but the future decides how it ends. Queens of Atlanta. Part 16, Facing the Ghosts. Hiding was never an option. That was old thinking. Survival thinking. Ivory refused it. They want shadows, she said. We give them daylight. The queens didn't scatter. They didn't retreat. They didn't wait for the next move to hit them sideways. Instead, they did something unexpected. They stepped forward. Nene sent the word. Not threats, not challenges. Invitations. Quiet messages delivered through people who still respected old rules. One location. Neutral ground. No weapons. No surprises. A meeting for ghosts who thought they still mattered. Naz made sure every angle was secured. Not aggressively, but intelligently. Nothing that screamed fear. Everything that whispered control. Jasmine handled perception. By the time the city caught wind of unusual movement, the narrative was already written. Power consolidating, not collapsing. Ivory walked in first. Not guarded. Not flinching. The men in the room carried history in their eyes. Scarred egos, long memories, resentment sharpened by time. They expected her godfather. They got her. You're not who we asked for, one of them said. Ivory didn't sit. I'm who you're dealing with. That rattled them. You want revenge? She continued calmly. But what you're really afraid of is irrelevance. You lost your place. And instead of rebuilding, you waited for the past to save you. Her words didn't rise. They didn't need to. You think this is about him? Ivory said. It's not. It's about whether Atlanta keeps bleeding old wounds or finally heals. One laughed, bitter. You think you can rewrite history? No, Ivory said. I'm ending it. She laid it out clean. No retaliation. No blood. No erasure. Just terms. Exit lanes, quiet settlements, space to age out without humiliation. A future where they weren't hunted but also weren't in the way. Power without violence. That scared them more than guns ever could. Naz spoke next, numbers precise, consequences unavoidable. Nene followed, explaining what staying loud would cost them socially. Jasmine closed it, reminding them the city had already moved on. The ghosts realized something too late. They weren't negotiating with fear. They were negotiating with structure. Ivory looked around the room. This is the last time the past gets to interrupt the future. Silence. Then one by one, nods, agreements. Defeat dressed as relief. When the queens walked out, Atlanta exhaled. The ghosts didn't disappear. They just stopped haunting. And that night, Ivory understood the final truth of power. You don't conquer the past by killing it. You conquer it by making it unnecessary. Queens of Atlanta. Final chapter, the crown. Atlanta didn't celebrate. It adjusted. That's how you knew it was real. Weeks passed after the confrontation. No explosions, no headlines, no bodies. Just calm settling where chaos used to live. Roots stayed open. Money moved clean. Rooms stayed quiet when the queens entered, and decisions followed when they left. The ghosts stayed gone. And then her godfather did something no one expected. He stepped back publicly. Not with a speech. Not with a farewell. With absence. Boards reshuffled. Names retired. Power that once answered to him began answering around Ivory instead. No announcement. No coronation. Just reality rearranging itself. Ivory stood on a rooftop one night, city lights stretched out like a kingdom finally at rest. The queens joined her, Na steady, Nene alert, Jasmine calm in a way that only comes after sacrifice. It's done, Na said softly. Nene smirked. As done as power ever gets. Jasmine looked at Ivory. They're watching you now, not him. Ivory nodded. She felt it. The weight, the stillness, the truth. I never wanted a throne, she said. Nas replied, that's why it's yours. Below them, Atlanta moved, unaware, protected, reorganized. No sirens, no panic. Just life flowing smoother than it ever had. The queens didn't rule with fear. They didn't rule with noise. They ruled with balance. Ivory finally understood what her godfather had been waiting for all along. Not ambition. Not loyalty. Not even strength. Readiness. She turned to the women beside her, her equals, her shield, her truth. Whatever comes next, she said, we face it the same way, together. They didn't toast. They didn't smile for cameras. They simply stood there, 4 women framed by a city that no longer questioned who held it steady. Atlanta never crowned them. It didn't have to. Because from that night on, when power shifted quietly, when chaos stopped mid-breath, when the city chose order over destruction, there was only one explanation whispered in rooms that mattered. The queens are watching. And some crowns? You don't see them. You feel them. The end.